Chapter 15. Anna's Spiritual Journeys. My name is Anna, and here's my story. I grew up in an ordinary family: mom, dad, older brother and sister. I always saw everything beautiful, bright, like a sunny day. Looking at people, from some I felt a pleasant calmness and light, from some nothing, and others I preferred not to notice. Even when at night the darkness thickened around me and frightened me, I just climbed with my head under the covers and looked into the void, looking at beautiful, living pictures, waiting for the dawn. At the age of 5, it was difficult for me to understand what exactly was happening to me. I just felt and heard what they were called: phantoms or unsettled souls, dead people who were looking for solace. The house where we went as a family was located where there were battles in the Second World War. There at night I saw endless darkness, dying people. There were a lot of them. They screamed in pain and fear, drowned, bleed. Someone had torn body parts. Someone could not get out of a burning car. And this continued every night, the same thing. But when dawn came, everything fell silent. The world was interesting for me, but only from its beautiful side. The memories of injustice and pain caused grief and desire to fight it. I remember how Dad chopped off the head of a rooster. It hurt me a lot in my soul. Why do you need to do it? I asked adults. Of course, they told me that everyone does it and it's food. But I refused such food. How is it possible to play with an animal, give it a name, consider it your friend, and then kill and eat the corpse of a friend? And I could not agree with this at all. I saved animals, went on a hunger strike, broke dishes, defending justice, but all this only led to punishment. It was then it seemed to me that they threw me, and I was looking for my parents, thinking that they were somewhere there. I just had to remember where. But despite the not understanding of my parents, I didn't care what they feel with them. There was such a case. Mom, having come home from work, was very tired and lay down to sleep, and I sat on the floor next to her bed, listened to her breath, when suddenly her breath stopped. Having hidden my breath, I began to listen to the beating of her heart. It was not heard. After some minutes of silence, a cry of disagreement with what was happening exploded inside me, as if I hit my mother's chest with all my energy, and her heart began to beat again. She woke up abruptly, as if she was frightened of something. It seemed to me then that all people feel other people, pain or joy, fatigue or peace, and they know what will happen with different actions. But it turned out that not at all, that then, next to me, there was not a single person who felt it, saw it or heard. Remember, when my grandmother died, after some time, I was settled in her room. After death, she sometimes came to me to be silent. I felt very bad, hurt, and said that she was gone. But even then I understood that she had freed herself from the prison of her painful body. But it hurt me, and it seemed that I was left alone. And then my carelessness disappeared somewhere, everything around became gloomy, and it seemed that there is nothing more beautiful. So when at night, a flashing shines dimly. I'm lying down reading a book. The door creaked. I looked out in the corridor and see a man who was our guest. He walked down the corridor to the bathroom. I looked at him and saw something not human. It was a monster. I was scared because this is a man, but what I saw was inside him. It was that feeling that I always knew that they exist, but didn't want to think and see these monsters. It's clear that this isn't only the beginning of a new way of knowing the world of living beings living in different worlds, or rather spirits in various manifestations inhabiting human consciousness. So we can say adult life began, though at the age of 9. When does adulthood come? When you start to know something that deprives you or carefree joy. Someone calls it a responsibility or duty or something else, but in fact, adulthood comes only when you recognize the true nature of everything and come to the state of yourself as one through the knowledge of eternity. Thus went year after year of painful states. from guilt for the death of loved ones to feelings of hopelessness, not knowing who I am and who needs painful states and who decides how everything around should be. Thinking about it, I had such a strange idea to hurt myself with just one desire and see how it turns out and how much my desires can come true. Once, by the power of my desire, I caused terrible pains in my stomach, from which an attack began. My mother called an ambulance and they took me to the hospital. There it turned out that I had an exacerbation of gastritis and a lot of other things. Why did I cause pain in myself? Because I considered myself guilty of the death of my niece and grandmother, that I did not control their condition and punished myself for this. This is how I created hell for myself with my suffering. Children's knowledge was not enough to understand everything and figure out what and why it's happening, and that each soul decides how long it will be in incarnation and when to move to another state. I heard and felt the pain and suffering from the people around me. So ghosts, nightmares, all this tormented me very much. I didn't know what to do with it, and most importantly, I couldn't find someone who would know what was wrong with me. At the age of 16, I decided that everything was enough. If I become normal, like everyone else, then I will stop suffering. Partially, I managed to stop seeing spirits, walking in a parallel world, but prophetic dreams and premonitions didn't go away. I started studying psychology, studied religion, but in the end, I realized that these are all dead ends, that this knowledge helps to feel harmonious for a short time. I felt then that there is true knowledge, and it's simple and understandable and very close, but where? At that moment in my life, I didn't know these truths. At the age of 33, circumstances in my life led me to a consultation with a magician who told me exactly what was happening to me. It became easier for me, better and clearer. This magician offered me to study magic. I agreed. There was nothing better for me at that time. Having studied and understood magic, I refused to practice and engage in it further. Since it didn't bring me true knowledge, I felt that if I practice it, I will be distracted from the most important thing and will not find my own path and my answers. Of course, this knowledge helped me in some way in understanding the creatures living in a parallel space and how the processes of settlements take place, how larvae appear, and that magic is just a kind of temporary control of spirits. But as soon as I started studying, a lot of things began to happen at once. It so happened that with my thoughts and knowledge, I attracted situations related to magic. I rented an apartment in which, as it turned out, aggressive brownies and the essence of an elderly woman lived, which, as she showed me, was killed in the bathroom. We managed to negotiate with the brownies, and they didn't touch me. They were in one of the rooms. A strange period began, as if everything at once decided to happen in a short time. Such an incident happened. A friend came to me and said, "Something is happening to me. I started to be afraid of everything. I feel bad. I have no strength. Help me." When I began to look, I saw that some woman had performed a rite for the death of my friend. I began to clean it up, removed it, and when I went into the astral plane to check, I see how near my house stands that woman who did the rites. She had a small white dog and some man nearby. A few years later, I met this woman in one place. She was very scared of me and quickly ran away. There were people who knew her and confirmed that she had such a dog and about a man according to the descriptions. A little later, I began to feel as if I was being strangled, and in my dreams, I began to see myself in a cemetery, as if I had been buried. I could not understand what it was and turned to a clairvoyant for help. She said that this one woman performed a rite on me to eliminate me and buried my photo in the cemetery. There were many other such cases. One thing is clear from this, that as long as you exist as a person, as a body, as a thought, there will always be a game for you created by your own thoughts, your only wish. I talked a lot with those who used magic to achieve different goals. They used magic to help people who turned to them on various issues. It seems that they did something good for people, but in fact they exchanged some entities, settlers for others, those who turned to them, and what a person asked for help with could past be healed, but over time something else appeared as a disease or some kind of problem, until this person begins to improve himself. He will continue to be in these diseases, wandering through life, now to one, then to another. Those I've met who practice magic were possessed by the entities. They couldn't fully cope with their effects and usually began to drink alcohol in large quantities, smoked, and almost always were in a critical condition without control of themselves. It was a constant battle. With age, the strength of their spirit weakened, and the settler almost completed to power. It seemed that they were already in hell during their lifetime. There was such a case. One girl calls me, one of those who practice magic, and screams into the phone in a voice that is not a human. "Save me, please do something." Then I saw how the demons settled in her, mocked her soul and body, frightening, hurting, becoming the most terrible nightmares of her memories. I began to look at him with love, and at the same time sand spread the light of love and protection to her soul. The soul began to feel strong and becomes larger and larger. And now it has already become more than a demon. And the demon retreated, stepped aside, afraid to come into contact with light and love. So I did many times for everyone who asked for help, because the only thing, love, is what can help with the fight for liberation. Any person can win, free himself, and therefore move to another state of life while still alive. Of course, everything that happens to everyone is the path in the karmic game, the game to achieve the goal. But each next chosen step determines the subsequent result and the speed of reaching the goal. But it all depends on the goal. When the soul feels all the free space with itself, then no one and nothing else can take possession of you, because everything is you, and you become free from karmic games and hell in all its manifestations. Such a case was interesting at the time when I went to an institution where there were only those who were interested in magic, divination and the like. Sometimes I read tarot there and taught it a little. One evening we went outside. Here was the rune teacher and her group of students. The teacher had a bag. In her bag a deck of my cards wrapped in a rag and her runes in a rag bag. Suddenly smoke came out of her purse. We looked in there and see how the rags between runes and cards light up. We had a shock. We understood it in such a way that the cards and runes, while working with them, absorbed many different spirit energies. And when these different spirits' energies were nearby, they tried to cleanse themselves of alien ones. It's like when you hug a demon with love, it dissolves. Then I decided to study different teachings, started meditating. I began to train mind reading, levitation, curing diseases of my body. With the thought, I anesthetized my pain, and then this place was cured. It didn't work out at all, and not at all right away. There was still a lot of I in me, and there were many karmic restrictions which limited the achievement desired. There was such a case. I grew a tooth for myself. It grew, but not at all where I wanted. It happened in such a way that every day I focused mentally and looked mentally at the place where I wanted to see the tooth. Every day I imagined it as if it was already there. My jaw ached, the temperature rose, and nothing else happened. But about 9 months passed since suddenly a tooth was discovered, a new, small, second row. I noticed that our desires come true only when there are no restrictions for them. Restrictions are karma, settlers, fear, public opinion because of which something is impossible because society can take away or condemn, that is, restrictions. This is a karmic cell, and in this case, desires can come true only those that are permissible within this cell. It happens that settlers also change. Who are settlers? There are souls that couldn't go anywhere. They remained in a space parallel to us, and some, over time, gain an understanding of themselves in past lives, gain knowledge of who they are, what they were good at, and what they were bad about. This determines them on a further journey. I saw how the soul of one person, for a year, couldn't go anywhere. It, surprisingly, didn't cling to the person, but simply was in such a state trying to understand itself. It seemed to freeze in anticipation of the clarity of what was happening. A year later, it asked for help, me and my relatives. It came to them in dreams. Interestingly, when they talked about it, forgave it, it left. And those stuck souls that begin to feed on the energy and emotions of the living, they settle down to a person and give, for example, a feeling of not loneliness. But in return, they stimulate different emotions either through fear or through thirst dependence, and such an exchange is obtained. And then who's stronger? Those who become completely alcoholics, their souls crumble, and the settler goes to another. There is such a moment when any settlers, energy suckers, etc. leave a person. He's left alone with himself. This is about 2 weeks before his death. Even at this moment, a living light with a golden overflow appears about this person. They are conductors. The soul is guided by them. During these 2 weeks, there is a comprehension of his whole life, for what he lived and what was the meaning. Sometimes true insights come, and sometimes nothing. Everything depends on what this person lived. This light remains even after the death of the body for a few more days, waiting for the realization of the soul that has freed from the body, which remembers itself and awakens. There were once 2 cases when, astrally, it was possible to save a person's life. One case was a plane crash, and only a little girl could be saved. At first it happened in the astral plane, and the next day I found out that a plane had crashed somewhere, but one little girl survived. All this happened spontaneously. And in another case, a friend was riding a motorcycle. A few minutes before the accident, I felt and saw how he was dying, or at least remained disabled. Without hesitation, I went into the astral plane and dropped the motorcycle before it collided with the car, and pulled him out, lifted into the air, and then returned back. A couple of minutes after the incident, I called him. He began to tell me about what a miracle happened to him, and that he definitely would not have survived that accident if not for everything that happened. He also said that it was if he had seen an angel lifted him into the air. How to explain such situations? Only in such a way that when a person takes care of his soul, he hears and sees everything that actually happens in the whole space as in general, and not just in a limited physical one, as I realized that you can purposefully come and help only the one whose soul asked for help. I remember my mother's friend was driving in a car. I was driving. She was sitting next to me. We were driving along the expressway at about 130 km per hour. A scene played in my head where a car rushes from the far left lane, crossing 3 lanes for the right, it crashes into us. I slowed down, and this car rushed in front of us. Mom's friend got scared and asked, "That car could crash into us?" It turns out that someone saved us, or we were lucky. Sometimes you don't know how to explain to a person what exactly happened. My answer was for her the simplest, that I felt I need to slow down and slowed down. For a long time I didn't understand how to navigate in space. I was tormented by such things as that someone is suffering, and I feel it. But who this person, I couldn't determine. Or I saw warning signs about the incident, but didn't know when that what can happen, and why do I see these warnings if there is nothing I can do about it. It was very difficult for me to be in places where there were a lot of people. All the feelings and thoughts of people seemed to touch and pull me. I felt great compassion and love for everything and everyone, and I was ready to give all of myself just to end their suffering and torment. And I gave. But it didn't heal them or me. There was such a long period when for several hours a day I was absent from this reality but present in another. As if life was passing simultaneously in different spaces, and physically, at these moments, I lived an ordinary life. I just couldn't remember what I was doing here later, but I remember what I did there. It felt like a dream, but I didn't sleep. And then the idea came to me that my soul is probably divided into different parts and each lives in its own space. And I just got in touch with my other parts and that I can unite myself into one. And I started looking for a way to do it. Then I practiced and consulted people on various issues of their past, present and future, their state of health, the presence of settlers. At that time, a girl came to me for a consultation, very talented but very unhappy. She asked me a lot of things about what she should do, about studying, about work, about housing, about men. But I saw one thing. While she was running away from herself, occupying her attention with everyday issues, her torment wouldn't end. The most important thing for her then was to believe in herself. She asked for help. Every day we did something to her, then cleaned the space, then cleaned the karma, looked for places that gave her strength and much more. And after 6 months, she began to improve her life and help other people. She is a psychologist by profession, and from birth, with the ability to see a lot and help people in such a way that the patient physically recovered only from communication with her. I also needed help, and she helped me. For what I am very grateful to her, because it was then with her help that I began to gain my integrity and my life began to change in the direction of purity of consciousness and understanding that what thoughts are like this and the scene with scenery and actors. And interestingly, the same people changed their behavior towards me just because I started to think differently. When I just started to practice working with settlers, I didn't know how to do it right and passed everything through myself. And now one lingered in me for several days. I then smoked, and that's why he hooked me. It was my weakness. The state of his presence were such. The body felt very strong, didn't want to sleep, emotions were constantly changing. It was fun, then sharply sad. And honest to everything, suddenly you can't hold back and you can scream. You can calm down and relax. There's tension in your whole body, and therefore you start to want to smoke or drink even more alcohol. Just do something to stop the stress. But if you succumb to these emotions and react by doing some actions, then the power of the settler begins to grow, and you begin to strive for maximum pleasure more and more. And if you cope with these emotions immediately and stop reacting, realizing that these are not your desires at all, and then everything will pass. At that time I felt ill, lay with a temperature of 40 for 5 days. He scared me so much, and I decided not to react. I just watched what was happening without emotion. I stopped smoking, recovered, and the settler left. I gained new knowledge and new experience. During that period, I met a young man and felt an unusual connection between us. I began to look there and saw how in one of the past lives we were a couple. And in that life, he accused me of witchcraft, drove me away and took my daughter. I went far into the forest, lived alone in my grief, and at some point I told him, wishing him the same suffering that I myself experienced. The amazing thing is that when I told him in this life about what happened there, he confirmed his unhappy life and the same life of his male relatives. He also said that all the women with whom he met cast spells on him. When he figured it all out with him and then forgave each other, we felt the lightness and correctness of everything what was happening. This is where our communication ended. After all, this meeting was for the release and dissolution of the stones of the past. Then I began to practice remembering and identifying events from past lives, understanding and clearing them. There was such a case when the settler was the soul of a child whose body has just died, and he didn't have time to realize himself outside the body. At the time of the funeral, a woman passed by who really wanted a child. Her desire was so strong that he flew into her, and she became happy in 1 second, but not for long. Then great sadness came to her, and he didn't know how to get out of it, and he was attached to her suffering and to his fear of being left alone. When I told that woman what had happened, and that in fact, having let go of that soul of the baby, she would calmly become pregnant and give birth to a child. Or another case. I didn't have enough of a part of the total amount to pay for the rent of the premises where I worked. Standing on a street near the house, I was thinking about how I could solve this issue. There was no solution yet, and I went to remove the dry leaves from the decorative fence that fenced the flower bed of my flowers. Slightly pushing the fence a little, I saw the amount of money rolled up. Taking it and counting it was exactly the amount that I lacked. In search of our answers, we met on the way people who helped us find these answers, or situations to help arise to move closer and closer to our goal, our desire, going beyond the framework or karmic games, and if remaining within the framework or karmic games, then in a conscious state. It all depends on the goal of each. Someone just wants to harmonize their lives, and someone wants to wake up, dissolving their own ego consciousness. I was thinking about how to achieve different states and gain experience in differences in energies. And then such a case occurred, arriving in myself, feeling my subtle bodies being in a state of bliss, when suddenly I begin to feel something else and understand that this is not I. And in 1 second, spontaneously I cut through these third-party energies in myself. They looked like many snakes passing through the whole body to the head. I struck myself with an energy blow, like a knife in the solar plexus, and there was a sharp feeling of weakness in the body. I lay down, and for some time was in a state of thoughtlessness and completely without fear and suffering. There was not a single emotion and not a single thought. It was an amazing experience, being in complete silence, doing work and interacting with people, and being in a state of thoughtlessness. The next stage was like this. My sister flew in from another country. She lived there for many years, and for 30 years we saw each other once. And then, when we met, we didn't understand anything about each other. All these years she was engaged in various spiritual practices. All this time we practically didn't communicate. But this time everything changed. It was as if we met for the first time, and as if we had never known each other before. We discovered so many new and beautiful things for each other. We began to communicate a lot and help each other in achieving new spiritual states and understanding of the surrounding space and ourselves in it. She helped me, suggested how to find in space and meet my husband Mikhail physically. A few months before our meeting with Mikhail, I experienced such states that it was time for me to pack my suitcase. Suddenly, I began to distribute my things and get ready for a trip, but I didn't know exactly where to go. I began to look for the reason for my new states. When I realized that I was going to Mikhail, visions began to come of how he looks, but it was more like a feeling than a direction vision. Age, name. A little later, a friend said, "I dreamed that you live with Mikhail." I took it as confirmation of my visions. Arriving in meditative states, the places where he lives were drawn to me. I virtually walked along the streets of the city. Several months passed from the moment of my first sensations about our meeting to acquaintance. An interesting feeling then was that if I go on foot, guided by my feelings, I will come to him. But I don't have to go anywhere. But I have to be at home, and we will meet there. And so it happened. We met on a site for spiritual practitioners. During the time of the search, spiritual teachers came to me who taught me how to navigate correctly in the astral space, understanding how everything works there, how the astral world intersects with the physical world, and what influences one world has on another occur, how to influence my space and how their own thoughts build whole worlds. Having understood this, I began to mentally create my own path and remove the obstacles that arise on the path. So the long-awaited, most beautiful moment in my life has come. We met with Mikhail, and the feeling that I experienced and still have next to him wasn't like anything in my life. I felt that for many lives I had been looking for this way home, and having found it. The most important thing was found: true knowledge about oneself, a single consciousness, the God of eternity, and a beautiful, harmonious, blissful, divine, eternal state came in the absolute love of our common space.